Well, welcome to our presentation. This is called Information Sharing for Enterprise Architects.
You guys are all troopers for hanging in until the end, by the way. Really appreciate that.
Yep. So my name is Jessica Dembe. I am a front-end web developer. I got started in this project in March. I've been playing around with Neo4j, but I've been really fascinated by the data visualization that Neo4j gives, and I've been playing it with it ever since.
My name's Patrick Elder. I'm the product architect for our program EAIR. I've been with the program about 2 years now. I was intrigued by Neo4j, kind of seeing how that was able to provide some visualization and show relationships, and was able to kind of bring this on and convince our customers that it was worth pursuing. So we're going to tell you our story and how we did this.
So a little bit about the company we work for. It's called Blackstone Federal. It's a division within Blackstone Technology Group with 3 divisions: federal, staffing, and financial services. Our branch, which is Blackstone Federal, focuses on delivering for federal clients, and product delivery methodology, which is based on our 4 principles of engaging with the customer, building products, measuring for metrics and how to improve, and to learn and to build on for future best practices.
And that's born out of our main 3 practice areas, which are cybersecurity, agile, and DevOps. So we're all about iterating over things and trying to improve continually as we do this stuff. You may be asking, how did we end up getting into this data analytics thing? Has nothing to do with those practice areas, but this is where we have our growth opportunity. So we had a lot of latitude as we started to try to take our path down here and take these principles with us.
Right.
Okay, so about our customers. So we are federal contractors. We work for DHS, that's the Department of Homeland Security, which was founded in 2002 as part of a reaction to some increased awareness about protecting the homeland. And really the mission of DHS was to bring together a bunch of disparate component organizations in the United States, such as the Federal Emergency Management Association, TSA, we're for Transportation Security, CBP, Customs and Border, Immigrations and Customs, and Coast Guard, Secret Service, just to name a few. Really at headquarters DHS, which is who we work for, our mission and their mission is to collaborate across all those component organizations so that they can share information, hopefully reduce risk and reduce duplication of effort. Our group sits under the Chief Information Officer, underneath the Chief Technology Officer in the Enterprise Architecture Office at DHS headquarters, and that's where our program resides.
So on to our work on what is our enterprise architecture.
Yeah, so anybody here aware of what enterprise architecture is? Anybody, any enterprise architects in the house? All right, thank God. Well, for those that aren't, I was able to pull this off of Wikipedia, a very trusted source for reliable definitions of these kinds of things. And I was able to find that enterprise architecture is a well-defined protocol for conducting enterprise analysis, design, planning, and implementation using a comprehensive approach at all times for the successful development and execution of a strategy. Everybody got it? Great. In real life, what it's really about is the confluence of where IT and business process comes together. So what is the business purpose of our organization, and how is IT going to help us do that? And from enterprise architecture standpoint, it's developing the target state of what that's going to be. So that breaks down into these 4 different areas. So we have a target state, describing and defining what's the to-be architecture, okay? What is that technology? What are the things that we're trying to do? What are we sharing? What are we doing individually? From a framework perspective, trying to develop processes and things that are repeatable and standard across the organization so that everybody's on the same sheet of music whenever possible. From risk reduction, we're talking about reducing duplication, and we're talking about reducing risk by using those frameworks and doing these same kind of processes at a high level. And lastly, the alignment piece. This is the part where we're starting to tie together those different pieces of the organization. So what is the mission of the organization? What are the capabilities that it serves? How is it funded? What IT is it using? What systems are using this stuff? What programs are doing these things? And this is the alignment part is where Neo4j really came in for us.
So a little bit about our program EAIR, or the Enterprise Architecture Information Repository. It's been going strong for the past 7 years. It started off as an access database on someone's laptop. So he knew the system very well, and he was able to track into it, but it wasn't really available to the public.
Yeah, and from that, it grew out and started answering some data calls from Congress. And all of a sudden, Department of Homeland Security realized they might need an enterprise system for this. And out of that, this system has grown to be the CIO's official line of sight data warehouse. So all the reporting that comes out of DHS to Congress or any external organizations comes from this program.
A little bit about our line of sight, how we stitch together data from external sources. We have, as the data warehouse for the Office of the Chief Information Office, you can imagine that there's a lot of data sources that we have to piece together and have people understand.
Yeah, and these can be relational databases. So some of these are just direct connections to relational databases. Other cases, we're hitting web services. Other cases, we're getting flat files. That could be CSV or XML. So a lot of different ways that we're collecting data and try to put this together and be that integration point for not only all the offices within the Chief Information Officer, but all those components across DHS as well.
So with those components, we are in use by over 15 different component organizations within DHS. So as you can imagine, again, different components, different sources. How do you make sense of it all?
Right, and I mean, one of the things that's been a real challenge for us and for DHS as a whole is that all these component organizations have a very diverse mission. TSA cares about transportation security. They could care less about emergency management. U.S. Coast Guard cares about protecting the waters. They don't really care about Customs and Border Patrol. But all these guys do have some overarching common mission, and we're trying to make sure that all that stuff is shared and we can reuse any pieces or parts of those components that we can.
And the thing that the EAIR does very well is that we've been able to aggregate data for the past 7 years. And with Neo4j and how to connect those lines of data, we are now seeking to align ourselves as not just a data aggregator, but as an information provider for all components across DHS.
And one of the things that EAIR is known for is that term line of sight. We use that a lot to talk about what we have. And what this is really showing how all these things that are within the organization are related. And again, we'll go through this. We've got a diagram that we can talk through. But thinking about how all these disparate component pieces of data are related to each other and how can we show that within our application.
So, who uses the enterprise architecture information repository? Some of our biggest users are not just our enterprise architects, they're also managers and they're also decision makers. We have seen other sources, folks use them for what systems is DHS using, products, investments, and different aspects to the line of sight that we will be introducing to you shortly.
Yeah, and so we've got this nebulous decision makers thing, and a lot of people want to know what that is. That can be somebody that's basically deciding, are we going to step forward with another technology on a system, or it's going to be talking about handing off that data to Congress or another entity outside of DHS to make a decision based on the information that we've gathered together.
So next here is the EAIR line of sight.
So this diagram represents the line of sight in general terms, and those of you that have been here for the last 2 days can recognize this looks an awful lot like a graph. We've got strategic objectives, so these are the things that come down from Congress as saying these are the objectives of your organization. We've got the mission and program data, so saying this is the mission that you serve and these are the programs that are going to meet those missions. Budgeting and investments, this is how this stuff is funded. Where are we getting this stuff from Congress, and when we ask for money, this is where it's all documented. Capabilities and activities, these are the actual things that the systems do. What do they do? That could be biometrics, screening, things like that. The systems themselves, so these are the applications that we're talking about, like EAIR would be an example of a system at DHS. We have the technology that supports them, so that's the Neo4js, the Oracles, all the other things that we'll talk about in our stack a little bit later. Data assets, so we think about these as, these are the containers of data inside of DHS. So maybe it's a database, maybe it's a part of a database, but this is a data asset that we have, and those can have agreements and information exchanges. So when we talk about interfaces that we have across these different systems, that's where we're documenting that stuff. And then they share sets of data. So the sets of data contains all these different pieces and parts of data. There could be many in a single data asset. And lastly, the performance measures and goals. These are the things that we're going to be evaluated against as we go through each one of our planning sessions. And so the more accurate and better that we perform on those performance measures, the more likely we are to get the budgeting that we request when we go do that.
So I just want to share with you EAIR today. So this is our application, just a little bit information about our stack. Currently it is an Angular JS application with Oracle Apex on the front end. and with all our database information is stored on an Oracle database. So as you see here, this is the front page of our application. Basically just showing you this is the most comprehensive site information for the OCIO, and quickly find the data you need safely and with our goal to improve data quality.
And just to give a bit of history here, as this program evolved from an Access database into an enterprise system, DHS has an enterprise license for Oracle database, so they decided to use that as their implementation. With that comes the application called Application Express, and that allows you to very quickly deploy web pages that are based on your database tables that allow you to manage the data, add, update, modify, delete, and really quickly represent tables and charts and things like that that you'll see when we start to show some more detail. As we started to modernize our product, we realized that that was a more antiquated way of looking at the data, so we wanted to try to add some new kind of look and feel. So that's where we started to pull in AngularJS. We're continuing to do that as we talk about bringing in Neo4j and some of the other visualization stuff we'll get into a little bit more.
So I'm going to walk you through a search of a brand new enterprise architect at DHS. So they're going to look at the EAIR system. A little bit of information about this. The search engine is on Elasticsearch. So it pulls data from our back end and displays it on the screen here. And then once you click on the system of EAIR, you get this lovely page. So we have system information. You have a description. You have what kind of application it is. Then you keep going about the aliases.
And these are just, there's a tremendous amount of information that we have for each one of these content types, but as you can see, it's a lot to digest. If you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you're going to be scrolling a lot, and you'll start to see these associated lists that represent the way that we tie stuff together and the way that it's represented.
So for example, you'll see here associated function areas, segments, and functional activities. And you keep going, investments and child systems, data profiles. Did anyone remember what they just saw on the screen? No? So that's why we thought about this information, and it's like, what does it mean for for enterprise architects? Well, first, it means the user is responsible for figuring out how systems are related to functional activities, investments, and other systems. Again, a lot of scrolling you have to do, and I have to be the one to connect the information. That's not really, a good time.
Yeah, and part of the thing that you can do is, this is mainly a search and discovery tool right now, so there's not a ton of analysis that's happening on its front end. The onus is really on the user to go in and do analysis, search for the thing that they're looking for, and click through and kind of walk through this stuff. Now you can imagine when you see these pages, yes, there are links everywhere where I can get more information about the related entities, but then I'm jumping to another page, and now I can't remember where I was or how I started to get there. So as you're doing this exploration, there's a different kind of analysis happen, but there's a lot of data here that's really untapped. And these are the things that we're trying to evolve as we add Neo4j to our stack.
The next is the user responsible for understanding how systems support the capabilities and activities of DHS. Of course, those are broad, those are disparate, so why not use a relational database to connect all those pieces together?
Yep, exactly. And I mean, as we said before, all the other content areas are related as well, because we could just as easily be talking about investments instead of systems here, or products instead of systems. But all these things have those interrelations that you saw on the diagram. We can click through all that stuff, but again, it's something where you're really jumping from page to page, and you don't really have that lineage that you might get from a graph.
And also, finally, the user must comprehend how systems meets DHS's current and future goals and objectives. Again, a lot of the analysis and the onus is on the enterprise architect or the manager or the decision maker to figure out how everything is aligned and if we are aligning to the goals and objectives properly.
And this is a great example of having to be 2 degrees of separation away from those direct relationships that we saw. So systems are not directly related to a mission, goal, or objective. That's through the mission that they support, the investment that they're funded by, or the capability and activity that they do. So imagine trying to do this in your mind as you're clicking through all this text and remembering which thing you clicked on to get to. Okay, so what thing does this support after all?
So that brings in our case to add Neo4j.
And so from here, when we started looking at Neo4j, we saw this graph visualization show up, and it hit for me. We had another product on our stack that was a modeling tool, was an enterprise architecture modeling tool. And it was supposed to take all the data that we had in EAIR and be able to present architecture diagrams for the enterprise architects. Sounds like a great idea. They all wanted to use it, but they couldn't. It was too difficult to use. We couldn't figure out how to load the data, and they couldn't figure out how to query their architecture diagrams. That's a major problem. When I saw the Neo interface, I said, wow, this is easy. I can add the data very easily, and I can get something that at least shows this stuff related to each other right out of the box. We don't have to do anything extra except load the data. And so what we decided to do was bring this to our client and say, hey, do you think this is something that enterprise architects might like? And they almost jumped out of their chair. Yeah, we think this is worth showing to people. So back in June, we had started to kind of develop a prototype. We had gotten to a point where we felt pretty good about what we had. We wanted to give it a shot. So say we had the Enterprise Architects Collaboration Forum, where all the enterprise architects from across DHS, so all the components are there, all the folks that are supporting them, and even a couple of other agencies were guests on this one. We showed them the Neo4j interface, and they loved it. They wanted it the next day. Now, of course, we had to pump the brakes on that one because we can't cut everybody loose without trying to explain Cypher and all that good stuff. But it did give us enough momentum to try to add that to our stack. So this is the case that we came up with. Obviously, the diagram piece was huge for us. That's something that we just needed to be able to show how all this stuff's related in one quick look. The at-a-glance thing was key. We wanted to make sure that, yes, you can get all the detail for the associated lists if you want, but if I want just a little bit higher level than that, I can see it and I don't have to do a lot of reading. And then the next piece was the analysis part. We didn't even know what analysis to develop for our customers because they've never had the opportunity to ask these questions of us yet. So we're trying to hopefully see as they walk through this and then they start clicking through to see all these different networks and how they're all tied together. Tell us what you want to know so that we can automate that and deliver it to you. And then lastly, our innovation kind of mission for our team. This was something that we thought was going to be a huge thing. We were bringing another tool into the suite that could really augment what we've already done without necessarily replacing anything that we've already done.
So we can, right after this, before the collaboration forum, we had to kind of discuss our value proposition on how EAR and Neo4j can bring us to next level EA.
And from that perspective, a lot of the things that we've already talked about, right? So EAR, we're doing a lot of integration from disparate sources. That's not broken. We still need to do that. We have search-based navigation. Search is used by almost all of our users. 85% of our hits are searches, and that's good. We want to keep that. We still want to be able to search and discover information about the enterprise, but we need to add more. And then we've got detailed information, and we've got a lot of detailed information. Still important, but we want to make sure that there are other ways to do this and give people options. You know, not everybody analyzes data the same way. So by bringing in Neo4j, we had a simple data loading mechanism. We wouldn't be worried about having a heavyweight data load process to sync up the data between Neo and our existing database. We have a flexible query interface that we could use based on nodes or relationships. So we could actually start thinking about this data a totally different way. And then lastly, the built-in visualization was something that jumped out, but then we started to think about how could we integrate that into the EAR tool so that it's a seamless interface for our users that requires a little bit less for them to learn in order to take part and make real benefit from this. So with that, that's what we tried to bring in. Synchronized data that goes across the two databases that's available in one place. We wanted to have searchable and clickable navigation of data that would necessarily be a page jump, but really just allow you to navigate within place. And lastly, multiple views of the data set. So if I want to look at the list values, I can absolutely do that. If I want to look at it as a diagram, I can do that too.
So going back to this diagram of the line of sight, this is how we were able to structure our database and investigate those relationships and dig into them further and how, say, the strategic objectives influence the mission programs and the performance goals into the investments for the budget year, for example.
Yeah, and so as far as our database design and what we decided to do with Neo4j, because the visualization piece was the part that was the most attractive to us, we got to thinking that this would be something that we could make very lean. So as far as we were concerned, the only things that we really needed to maintain were the names, the acronyms, and the relationships. That's all we needed to show what we needed to show to do our value prop. So that's the way that we did it. And this is the part that we're saying as we go forward and kind of look to our customers to tell us, like, what kinds of things are you asking? What other pieces of information do you need to know while you're doing this traversal of relationships to get the information out that you want? So that was our kind of lightweight approach to this. We used the load CSV mechanism to do that. And our database is pretty small comparatively. I think I've heard some pretty big numbers, you know, with bees and all that stuff in there. We're probably about 30,000 entities and 50,000 relationships.
So a little?
I'm sorry? And 50,000 relationships.
So a little bit about what we've shown so far. Come on. So here are some examples of the relationship. So first, we did a search on the activity. If you looked at the activity here, you'll see how this spreads out to the primary activities, more primary activities here, and how they're so disparate. Now, this was the list that you were seeing earlier in just saying associate activity, associate activity. Instead of clicking into each associated activity, this would provide a mechanism to show you an activity that you'll be interested in. These dig in further, but if I do search for material, for example, that was not as extensive, but
the significance here is that as we're looking at this, the purple ones are our activities. So these are the actual things that these systems do. As we're looking at these systems that do the same kinds of activities, are there ways to share those services? Are there products that they're using that do the same thing that we should be sharing licenses with? Does one of these systems do it better than everybody else and they should just be a shared tenant of what they're doing? Or are they really that different that they need to be segregated and be their own entities? That's what we're trying to think of and find as we're doing this enterprise architecture effort. And as you go across, you start to see the network. That kind of analysis is really what we want to be able to pull out.
So we also have the same thing for capabilities, which can get a little more complex. Like so you see these, once again now, these 2 degrees of separation between, say, this functional area, which is domain and situational awareness, and how it's associated with monitoring homeland security risks and threats.
And so this capability and activities and functional areas are hierarchy in what we have right now. So you can start to see how those are all related as you traverse the tree. The way that we had that represented in the system now is a standard kind of tree navigation that you would see, kind of think of Windows Explorer or something like that. This allows something that's a little bit more visual, and you can collapse and expand depending on what exactly you're looking for.
Oop. And again, we have a similar example for functional area and goals. I wanted to especially show you the goals because then we now are mixing in the missions with the goal and the objectives and to these tree nodes that will traverse each other.
Right, like we mentioned before, this is a good example of that extra degree of separation that we weren't able to represent in the original system by just having the one distance away. So by being able to have this explorability and be able to show those different length of depth of relationship is something totally new that hasn't really been tapped by our client chat.
Yes.
Yep. For the Neo part. Not very long. I think I was able to get the prototype database up and running within a couple of days. And that was using a test set of data, but I was able to drop that in with the production set the next day pretty much. So it was pretty clean. Like I said, we kept this pretty lean and followed the entities that we had in the existing relational system. Not that we haven't thought about revisiting that as we go forward, but we want to see some more use cases as far as the analysis part goes. Right now, it's more of the visual representation part.
And speaking of the visual representation part, so this is the part that we demonstrated to our stakeholders in June. So we gave that example again of the EAR system and how it uses different software, different activities, and different investments and data assets that makes up that system. You might see here, this is a data asset. What's the difference between the EAR and the data asset? Well, the data has to come from somewhere, and that's where we're showing the relationship from where it's getting the data from, the investments, and the activities.
Yeah, so for data assets, we can talk about producing and consuming data versus just being a system that uses it. So this is in D3. This is what we wanted to try to do to bring in this visualization inside of our app and embed it. So it's just a one user interface. Jessica's been doing a lot of great work with that, and as a part of what we've been doing to try to modernize the look and feel, we've gotten a lot of influence from some new leadership on the federal side to try to push for this open source stuff. So we're also using D3 to do some representations of some of the data that we have relationally. It's allowed us to kind of create, a one-stop shop that allows us to kind of put more of a clickable interface. So less of a, hey, I'm going to do a Cypher query to get the data that I want, and I'm just going to have push buttons at the top. Do I want to see capabilities? Do I want to see systems? Do I want to see products? And allow that to take the place of the associated lists that we had in the original app. So allow you to just see that list as a network diagram.
All right, and And one second. All right. So before, just again to reiterate where we've been before, it is a heavily text-based application that requires the users to kind of fix the puzzle pieces for themselves. Again, a lot of navigation. I have to go to this system, to this data asset, to figure out where the pieces go and to kind of follow the trail mix on how the system is created and what's producing and what's consuming and all that information. And then again, like I said before, the user is expected to remember these relationships. With Neo4j now, we can use D3.js to visualize each representation on every page. Navigation will be in place to help the user decide what they want to see and what they wouldn't want to see, and most importantly, for the user to easily trace relationships. Okay. So, going forward, we're looking for a complete redesign of our system with a new logo, new name, color, just everything, just a new system to be complete in 2018. We would like to continue to leverage open source technologies, including Neo4j and all that it has to offer, and to transform ourselves from an information aggregator to an information provider.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, part of this is making sure that we can have visualizations on every page, so not quite so much text, that's what we're looking for, but then also the data analysis piece, like what are the visualizations that are going to provide additional information to just the aggregation that we've done by pulling in all these different sources? Any question? Yeah, so I think we're going to basically start out with a community edition to kind of see how far we can go with that and see what our performance looks like. We're trying to share the servers that we have for our application as it is. So we haven't done a whole lot of load testing yet, as we're still in the development, but we're going to be pushing into test, I think, actually next week. So we'll be able to start looking at that with a full data set and then see if we can get some of our users in there and start testing it out. Yeah, that's what we have for our application server right now. Like I said, not a huge amount of data in our system, and our users range from 500 to 1,000 each month.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, so for our stuff is we can drill down to the data element level, but that stuff all resides in our repository. So we do get copies of that from our sources. We don't do a whole lot of linking out, with the exception of our governance tracking tool, which is also kind of lockstep with us as far as being a new tool that's going to launch in 2018. But we do have that lineage to go all the way down and see the whole thing, and add as much detail as you want. There's even a lot of detail that's in the system in the database that we don't display because of certain sensitivities and stuff like that. But it's available upon request. Yeah, I was hoping that we could get away with not having to be Mega or True or any of those guys. I think what we wanted to try to be able to do is provide some visualization and some iconography that would be custom for DHS and allow them to see the stuff that they want to, and then ultimately provide some analysis on top of that. I don't know if we can compete with Mega though. Yeah, we're trying to take the approach of, can we get the first, big bang for the buck out in 2018, shoot for that and see if we can get some good feedback and then let that kind of drive where we want to go. We've also been looking at our document repositories right now are pretty much keyword searches in SharePoint. We want to start seeing if we can pull that stuff in and do some NLP to do some topic modeling in Neo to help drive a lot of the review boards that are trying to do some analysis on those documents.
All right. So feel free to connect with us. We are at Blackstone Federal. We are passionate engineers who would like to address any technical needs, especially across the client space. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and on Twitter. Yeah, and then we would always love new ideas and love how we can all improve upon our system. You can find us on email, or you can just tweet at us. I'm sure someone will tell us about this. So that's what we got. Cool.
Oh, yep.
Any questions?
That's pretty much it for our content so far. Any other questions? All right.
All right.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, guys.